Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and before we get into this episode brought to you by the Sports History Network, I wanted to tell you about another book giveaway that we have on the website. Our friend of the network, Timothy J. Brown, is giving away 5 copies of his latest book. This book is titled Hut Hut Hike, A History of Football Terminology. This book explores the history of football terminology by examining when and why more than 400 familiar words and expressions entered the game. By linking the game's evolution to changes in its language, readers learn the origins of first string, basic fundamentals, X's and O's, long snapper, and hundreds more of terms used in every football conversation or broadcast. Organized in easy-to-read, bite-sized chunks and filled with period images and illustrations, Hut Hut Hike tells football's history one word at a time. Now, to sign up for a chance to win your copy of the book, head to sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways.
Timothy P. Brown from footballarchaeology.com, one of the top rules experts on early football history, joins us today to talk about an experimental game in 1905 that helped set the new rules in motion after the President of the United States got involved to help tame the game of football. Tim's got the scoop on this and the football archaeology coming up in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to Tuesday, Football Archaeology Day, as we go to footballarchaeology.com's author, Timothy P. Brown. And Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darren. Thank you. Good to see you again. Looking forward to chatting.
You have one of your most recent tidbits that you've dug up some real good football archaeology on this, and just a great story from 1905 that I'd love to have you tell the audience about.
Yeah, so I think probably anybody that's listening knows that there were a lot of concern, leading up to and then in the 1905 season about injuries and deaths on the playing field, and so, there was just a lot of pressure to make some changes to the game. We had the whole Teddy Roosevelt thing. And then, in the end, the guy who's the president or chancellor of NYU, he got people together to start really looking at this issue. And, so the newspapers had all kinds of suggestions about possible rule changes. And, there were people throwing out all kinds of different ideas. And so they kind of started talking about, is there a way that we could experiment and have a test game? And, there have been other times where that occurred. Stagg did some things, this is like maybe another 5 years down the road. And Hugo Bezdek, did some testing. So there's a couple different instances of stuff like that. But so this one was, while they were kind of looking for a game to be played, basically the teams had disbanded for the year. But for some reason, the folks at Fairmont, which is now Wichita State, in Wichita, they had been looking, to maybe play a Christmas game just to kind of keep folks entertained and have some fun. And it turned out then that they agreed to play a test game against Washburn, and which is a state, school in Kansas. And so, they were, and basically what they agreed to do was to try out some of the rules that were being proposed. And, I don't know exactly how much interaction these guys had with folks back east, but the coaches of the two teams, Fairmont was coached by a guy named Willis Bates, and Washburn was coached by John Outland. So Bates had played at Dartmouth, and Outland had played at Penn, and he's the Outland Trophy guy, right? Mm-hmm. So they were both, they both had East Coast cred, and the fact that they would play a game would be something that would be kind of trusted, for want of a better term. So, and just one other odd thing about that year was that Fairmont earlier in the year had played a game at night, and it was played under, I think Coleman Lanterns is a local manufacturer somewhere in Wichita area, and so they had Coleman gas lanterns hanging all around the field and over the field. Maybe not over the field. I think they had anyway, but it turned out to be kind of a mess because it just didn't put off enough light. But anyway, it's just one of those early little factoids.
Yeah, I never heard that before. That is kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, there were others that did electrical, lighting before that, but they're the only ones I've ever heard of that tried to do, gas lanterns. But
well, we have the Zippo factories not too far from here. I wonder if they tried that. A bunch of Zippos lit up at the same time.
Or just have
in Bradford.
Have all the kids turn on their cell phones.
Yeah. There you go.
So, So, anyways, they agreed to play a game on Christmas Day, and so they said, okay, we're going to allow the forward pass. We're going to require offenses to gain 10 yards rather than 5 in 3 downs, and then they also gave officials the authority to throw somebody out of a game if they, for any kind of unnecessary roughness, which was they didn't have that necessarily at the time. So, as it turned out, it turned into kind of the game was kind of a turd, frankly. It was like it ended up in a 0-0 tie. Each of the teams threw some forward passes and completed, 2 or 3. But we don't really know. I mean, all we really can operate off of is newspaper articles. So we don't really know how they threw the ball, right? And we just know they didn't do it very effectively. The whole thing comes down to that they just couldn't imagine and think through how to change the game of football, how to approach it differently, given a new set of rules, right? And so it's just that idea that for us, we know the over spiral is the way to throw a football, but they didn't. They tried all kinds of basketball, two-handed set shots. They did shovel passes. They did, you name it. They tried different. They threw the football like a grenade, with a straight arm. And just if you think about how do you tell somebody to go out on a pass route when they've never seen a pass route before, right? I mean, what do you do? Yeah. So these are the first guys trying to figure this stuff out, and they didn't do a very good job of it. And you can't really blame them. A lot of people struggled with it for about 10 years. Once the pass was legalized, there were some that got after it right away, but most of them did. Most people didn't. So, and it turns out that, so one of their big conclusions was that, because they really didn't adapt their offenses at all, they went from playing a game where they had 3 downs to get 5 yards. Now all of a sudden they have 3 downs to get 10 yards. They didn't change their offense really. So guess what? They didn't get many first downs, right? And so they viewed that as like a silly rule. Oh, it's never going to work. Well, it didn't work because they didn't reimagine the game. And then find the tactics, find the techniques, to do things differently. So, anyways, I think it's really just the neatest part of the game in total is, number one, that it failed, right, and that but it shows the difficulty of reimagining how to play this game under a new set of rules and why it took a while for that to occur. But they did their best. They were willing to try it, and so, good for them, right?
Right. I always found it kind of interesting, hearing that story. And, the reason why they did it is to try to report back east to give them some information on, it's an experimental game on some of these rules. But you never really see a whole lot, except for maybe years later. There was, I think, one gentleman that was involved or was a spectator or something that had some information about it. We don't know how accurate it was or anything, but there's nothing going back to to Camp or to John C. Bell or any of those guys back east that tells what happened in this game. What they tried. And I'm always surprised, and maybe someday somebody will open up some notebook and in their great grandparents' house or something, and we'll have some information. But I always found that kind of fascinating.
Well, you have to believe that there were at least personal letters exchanged. So, because both of these coaches were, they were Eastern guys, and they maintained their connections. So there had to be something back and forth. But yeah, as far as I know, there's no report to a committee, and maybe it was because there was so much turmoil at the time. We'd had multiple rules committees in the late 1800s, and now, we're going between the IFA and, whatever. And this whole thing that NYU is getting going that eventually becomes the NCAA. But, who knows?
Yeah. It's not like they picked up the telephone and called somebody very, very well.
Yeah. No, exactly. And so it had to be, just the fact that they were even in touch somehow they got all this material. Now the newspapers, that was the wire services, and that would have been one of the main ways for them to even learn what the potential rule changes are. But this game got reported on, if you look it up, you name it, any newspaper in the country, they did at least some kind of report on this test game. So, it was, people were paying attention to it, but, then it was forgotten pretty quickly.
Right. Huh. So it might be one of the original bowl games. Well, of course, the Rose Bowl came out in 1902, so I guess it wasn't the original holiday bowl game, but it was played right on Christmas Day even, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
And so one of the things that, part of the reason I did this particular tidbit was because I had come across a real photo postcard of the 1906 Fairmont team, online. And I ended up, buying things because most people looked at it and said, I don't know who this is, but I knew who they were, so I basically was able to pick it up for a song, but, and so my best guess is, that the vast majority of the 1906 guys were on the 1905 team too. So probably a number of the guys who played in the game are in that picture. But,
interesting.
So I have a piece of history in my possession.
Yeah, well, that's a cool piece of history, and we appreciate you sharing it with us each and every day on your tidbits. And speaking of that, why don't you tell the listeners how they can enjoy some of these great photographs and your website and where they can get a hold of the tidbits each and every day.
Yeah, so the site it's a Substack site, but I've got a personalized URL, so it's just footballarchaeology.com, and you can sign up there. And if you subscribe, you'll get an email every night at 7:00 Eastern, delivered into your inbox, and then you can read it then at your leisure. And so the only other thing I would just say is if you bookmark the site and you're trying to figure out something on football history, there's got one of those little search magnifying glass things in there. So put in a term, see if something pops up for you, and there's probably a story or two in there.
Yeah, so great stuff. All right, well, appreciate you, Tim, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Darren, thank you very much. Look forward to it.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. we invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. A special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.